Victor Hayes sat behind his polished mahogany desk, the dim light of the study casting long shadows across the room. The grand chandelier overhead flickered slightly, as if echoing the unease in his mind. He tapped a gold pen against the ledger in front of him, each click sharp in the silence. Numbers danced before his eyes, debts stacked higher than he could climb, and the inheritance that Simon Hayes had received gnawed at him like a toothache that refused to dull. Victor's breathing was steady, deliberate, but inside a storm raged. Simon's recent fortune, millions inherited from their late uncle, was rightfully his in Victor's eyes. Simon, naive and trusting, had never grasped the cunning required to survive in the upper echelons of business. Victor had tried persuasion, charm, even threats masked as friendly advice. Nothing worked, and now, desperate and cornered, a darker thought began to form in his mind. What if Simon never reached the money at all? The plan was simple, or so Victor told himself. He would stage Simon's death, make it appear as though a tragic accident occurred, and step in as the grieving cousin. No suspicion, no evidence. Perfect. He pushed his chair back and walked to the window, looking out at the sprawling estate. Rain tapped against the glass, a soft rhythm that felt almost conspiratorial. Everything had to be precise. Timing, location, alibis, he had left nothing to chance. To execute this plan, he needed someone willing to get their hands dirty, someone expendable. That's where Ethan came in, a low-level criminal with a shady past and more fear than loyalty. Ethan was perfect. Victor's phone buzzed. It was Ethan. "Everything's ready." Ethan's voice rasped over the line. "The car, the brakes, you just tell me when." Victor smiled, the first real expression of satisfaction in weeks. Tonight. It has to be tonight. As he hung up, a faint knock at the door startled him. It was Laura Mitchell, his personal assistant, carrying a stack of folders. Her expression was neutral, but her eyes betrayed the slightest flicker of concern. "Everything's ready for tomorrow's board meeting," she said, placing the folders carefully on the desk. She paused, glancing at Victor. "Is everything okay, sir? You've been distant." Victor forced a smile, sharp and rehearsed. "Just tired, Laura. You know how stressful these things get." Laura nodded, but a nagging feeling gnawed at her. She had worked for Victor for years and knew his moods well. Something was off, more than just stress. She picked up a folder and flipped through it, pretending to review the documents. Behind her calm exterior, suspicion crept in. Victor turned back to the window, watching the rain intensify. "Laura," he said, his voice low, "I need everything to be perfect. No mistakes. Do you understand?" Laura nodded, uneasy, but didn't press further. She had learned long ago that pressing Victor on sensitive matters could be dangerous. Still, she made a mental note to keep an eye on him. Later that evening, Victor and Ethan met in the dimly lit garage. The air smelled of oil and wet concrete, and the sound of the rain outside made the place feel isolated, almost cinematic. Ethan paced nervously. "You're sure this will work? What if someone sees us?" Victor's eyes narrowed. "It will work. Just follow my instructions and you'll be fine. Remember, your job is to make it look like an accident. Nothing more." Ethan hesitated, glancing toward the garage door. "And if something goes wrong?" Victor's smile was cold. "Then you'll wish you had followed instructions." The tension was palpable. Both men understood the gravity of what they were about to do. This wasn't just a heist or a robbery. This was murder. But Victor had convinced himself that it was a necessary evil, a transaction to reclaim what should have been his all along. Meanwhile, Laura sat in the study, quietly organizing papers. She noticed a series of emails on Victor's computer, strange messages to someone named E. The tone was urgent, almost conspiratorial. Her curiosity grew, tempered by fear. She didn't know what Victor was planning, but instinct screamed that it was dangerous. As the storm raged outside, a shadow flickered across the edge of the estate. Unseen by both Victor and Laura, someone was watching. The mysterious figure had been near the road where Simon often drove, and tonight, it seemed, the timing was perfect. The witness's presence added an unseen layer of suspense, a quiet heartbeat of tension that foreshadowed the chaos to come. Back in the garage, Victor went over the final details with Ethan. Simon takes the cliff road every night. He pointed to a map spread on the hood of a car. Rain makes the turn tricky. That's why tonight when he drives, he won't see it coming. Ethan, once he's in the car, He trailed off, letting the implication hang in the air. Ethan swallowed hard, nodding. Afterwards, Victor continued, we'll make it look like he lost control. The car will hit the cliff, tumble, done. We walk away clean. Ethan's hands shook slightly. And the cops? Victor laughed softly, almost to himself. They'll see what they want to see. No one suspects a man like me, not Simon's family, not the police. Everything will look like a tragic accident, nothing more. As Victor finished, the storm outside seemed to echo his intentions, thunder rolling like an omen. Both men were silent, the weight of what they were about to do settling over them like a shroud. Hours later, Laura locked up the study and glanced once more at Victor's office. Something inside her screamed danger, but she couldn't articulate what. She had no proof, only instincts. Little did she know, her intuition would soon place her at the center of a deadly secret that could cost lives. Meanwhile, in the shadows near the cliff road, the jogger, Maya, ran through puddles, oblivious to the storm's violence. She noticed a shadow moving strangely near the roadside. It was just a fleeting glimpse, but enough to plant a seed of curiosity and fear. She didn't know what she saw, but in the coming days, her observation would be the thread that unraveled everything Victor had so carefully plotted. Victor lay awake that night, watching the rain lash against his window. He felt invincible, untouchable, confident that tomorrow everything would finally be his. But the universe has a way of reminding people that no plan, no matter how perfect, is immune to the unpredictability of witnesses, conscience, and fate itself. And so, as the night deepened and shadows stretched across the estate, the first act of this deadly game quietly, terrifyingly came to a close. The pieces were in place, the storm raged, and murder was imminent.
The night was heavy with rain, each droplet hammering against the asphalt of the winding cliff road. Victor Hayes sat behind the wheel of Simon's sleek black car, his hands gripping the steering wheel with calculated precision. Beside him, Ethan fidgeted, glancing nervously at the dashboard and the storm-washed trees whipping past. Simon, oblivious to the danger, chatted casually, commenting on the weather, unaware that tonight this conversation would be his last. "Are you sure this shortcut is faster?" Simon asked, leaning back in his seat. His voice carried a slight laugh, naive trust echoing in every word. Victor's jaw tightened, forcing a strained smile. "Yeah, it's quicker, trust me, we'll be there in no time." The car's engine hummed steadily, a mechanical heartbeat that masked the tension in the air. Victor's mind raced, rehearsing the plan. The car would swerve, brakes subtly sabotaged, the cliff on the right, the perfect accident. Nothing could go wrong. Or so he told himself. Ethan shifted in the passenger seat. "You sure you want to do this tonight? The cops, witnesses." Victor shot him a glare sharp enough to cut metal. "I've accounted for everything. There are no witnesses. Just do your job. That's all I ask." The road curved violently ahead, slick from the rain. Victor's knuckles were white as he guided the car around it with deceptive calm. The lights of the cliff edge loomed briefly in the distance, shrouded by fog and rain. Simon laughed at a joke he had just told, blissfully unaware of the deadly trap closing in. Ethan's hands trembled as he reached under the dashboard, subtly loosening the brake lines. The metal clicked faintly, almost drowned out by the roar of the storm, but the sound was enough to make Ethan flinch. Victor noticed nothing, his focus entirely on the road and on Simon. "Almost there," Victor murmured, voice low, calm, rehearsed. He didn't look at Simon, who continued talking, his laughter carrying through the car like a cruel soundtrack to what was about to happen. Then it happened. The brakes failed. The car veered sharply toward the cliff edge. Victor reacted instantly, steering with precision, but not enough to avoid the fall. The tires skidded on wet asphalt, spinning, tumbling toward the jagged rocks below. Simon screamed, a high, terrified sound that pierced the storm. Victor's heart pounded, adrenaline mixing with cold calculation. This had to look like an accident. He did nothing to save Simon. The car teetered, then plunged. Victor jumped out at the last moment, rolling across the gravel to feign shock. Smoke rose from the twisted wreckage, flames licking at the edges. "Simon!" Victor shouted, voice cracking with false panic. He crouched near the edge, peering into the darkness. "Somebody call 911!" Ethan, pale and shaking, followed Victor's lead. It happened so fast." Victor forced his grief, his eyes wide with staged horror, while Ethan nodded numbly. The storm and fire masked the small clues of tampering. For now, Victor's perfect plan seemed flawless. Detective Mark Ryland arrived minutes later, his coat dripping from the rain, eye scanning the wreckage with the precision of a seasoned professional. The flames had been mostly doused by emergency crews, but smoke still rose in curling tendrils. "Witnesses?" Ryland asked, voice calm, authoritative. Victor approached, still shaking, his voice trembling. No witnesses. It was an accident. He just lost control." Ryland's eyes narrowed. Something didn't sit right. The skid marks were off, inconsistent with the driver's movements. The angle of the car suggested tampering. He crouched, examining the brake lines and the subtle scratches on the undercarriage. Nothing blatant, but enough to make a trained eye suspicious. Meanwhile, Laura had arrived at the estate, having noticed Victor's odd behavior earlier and feeling uneasy after receiving a call from a concerned neighbor about the accident. She stood silently in the rain, umbrella in hand, watching Victor as he recounted the story to emergency personnel. Her instincts screamed danger. There was something about his performance, too precise, too rehearsed. She made a silent vow she would find out what really happened. Back at the scene, Ethan's nerves finally cracked. Alone with the wreckage, he muttered under his breath, This wasn't supposed to happen. He wanted an accident, but this was murder." Victor's voice cut across the night. "Keep quiet, Ethan. No one can know what really happened." Ethan nodded, guilt and fear etched into his pale face. The moral weight of the act pressed down on him, heavier than the rain. He had killed before, yes, but never so cleanly, never so intentionally. This wasn't just theft or intimidation. It was deliberate, premeditated murder. Maya, the jogger who had been running her usual late-night route, had paused near the cliff edge earlier that evening, watching shadows move suspiciously. She hadn't known what she saw, a car, a figure, hands working frantically, but something felt wrong. The storm had forced her to retreat, heart pounding, mind racing with questions. Unseen, she had witnessed the moments leading up to Simon's death. Now, as she watched the aftermath from a distance, she felt a chilling certainty. This wasn't an accident. Someone wanted Simon dead. Her pulse quickened and a decision formed. She would speak, even if it meant putting herself in danger. Victor returned home that night, soaked, exhausted, and triumphant. He lit a fire in the study, the flickering flames reflecting in his eyes, now sharp with greed and anticipation. He counted his imaginary fortune, envisioning the life he would lead once Simon's inheritance was his. Laura, still uneasy, had returned to her apartment, replaying the day in her mind. Emails, phone calls, Victor's odd behavior, they all pointed to something sinister. She didn't know what yet, but she was determined to find out. Victor, confident no one suspected him, didn't notice the small envelope tucked into his briefcase by Laura earlier that day, an envelope containing receipts, suspicious transactions, and cryptic notes that could, if discovered, unravel his entire plan. The storm outside raged on, thunder rolling like a warning across the estate. Inside, Victor poured a glass of scotch, savoring the illusion of control. But in the shadows, unseen, tension coiled like a snake. Every action had consequences. Every decision could unravel with one misstep. For now, the murder seemed perfect, but as Detective Ryland carefully documented the scene, noting inconsistencies, and as Maya prepared to step forward with her eyewitness account, the delicate threads of Victor's plan began to fray. The night ended with rain-soaked streets, twisted metal, and silent observers. Somewhere, unseen, a witness had recorded everything, mentally, carefully, and soon the carefully constructed facade of a grieving cousin would face a reckoning.
Detective Mark Ryland had spent the past 2 days poring over the evidence from the crash. Every detail, from skid marks to brake rinds, screamed that this was no accident. The problem was proving it. The evidence was circumstantial, enough to make a seasoned detective suspicious, but not enough to make an arrest. Ryland reviewed the statements he had taken from witnesses. Most saw nothing, dismissed the storm, or were too frightened to approach the scene. But one report, filed hesitantly, had caught his attention. A jogger named Maya had noticed someone tampering near the car just minutes before the crash. She had hesitated to come forward, unsure what she had actually seen. Now, after reading the news coverage, she realized she couldn't stay silent. Ryland made the call, and Maya agreed to meet at the precinct. She arrived drenched, hair plastered to her face, eyes wide with anxiety. I didn't think it was my place," she admitted, shaking. "But I saw someone, a man, working on Simon's car that night. I didn't know what it was, but now I do." Ryland leaned forward, careful not to startle her. "Can you identify him?" She hesitated, then nodded slowly. "I think, yes, it was Victor Hayes. I only saw a shadow, but the way he moved, the posture, I recognize him. I'd seen him around town before." That single revelation electrified Ryland. Everything suddenly made sense. Victor's financial troubles, the suspicious behavior of his assistant Laura, and the presence of Ethan. Victor's perfect facade was beginning to crack. Meanwhile, Victor, blissfully unaware that the walls around him were closing in, met with Ethan in the garage. Victor's usual charm was replaced with tension. He had sensed a shift, small, almost imperceptible, but enough to make his instincts flare. "Ethan," Victor said, voice low, almost threatening, "did anything go wrong?" Ethan hesitated, avoiding Victor's gaze. "No, I mean, yes, but it's fine. Nobody saw us. Everything went as planned." Victor's eyes narrowed. "Be careful what you say. One slip, and it's over. Understood?" Ethan swallowed, nodding quickly, but doubt had begun to creep in. He knew that even the most careful criminals could be exposed by small details, overlooked mistakes, or worst of all, a witness. Back at the estate, Laura sat in her apartment reviewing the notes she had quietly taken over the past few weeks. Emails between Victor and a mysterious E now made horrifying sense. Her instincts, once a nagging whisper, became a clear alarm. Victor had orchestrated Simon's death. Her hands trembled as she scrolled through the financial records she had secretly copied. Large, unexplained transfers, encrypted emails, veiled threats. It was a pattern. Victor had planned this meticulously, but he had underestimated her. Laura realized she held the proof that could bring him down, but fear gripped her heart. Victor was not just dangerous, he was brilliant and unrelenting. One wrong move, and she could become his next target. Detective Ryland's investigation intensified. He subpoenaed Victor's phone records and tracked the financial anomalies Laura had discovered. It was a delicate dance. Too much pressure too soon, and Victor would vanish. Too little, and evidence might be lost. Ryland scheduled a discreet meeting with Laura. She brought the files, shaking slightly as she handed over the evidence. Ryland examined them carefully. Bank transfers, cryptic messages to Ethan, and notes detailing Victor's desperation and obsession with Simon's inheritance. "This is enough to establish motive," Ryland said quietly. "Now we need proof he executed it." Laura bit her lip, panic rising. "He's careful. He thinks no one's watching, but I've seen him acting strange late at night. He's not just planning, he's calculating." Ryland nodded. "We'll catch him, but we need patience. We need him to make a move." Victor, unaware that the net was closing around him, began to grow paranoid. Shadows seemed to lurk everywhere. The rain and storm had subsided, but every unfamiliar sound made him flinch. He confronted Ethan, sensing a shift in loyalty. "You're nervous," Victor said, voice icy. "Tell me the truth. Have you said anything to anyone?" Ethan avoided his eyes. "No, sir, I swear." Victor studied him, his mind racing. "Remember what happens to those who falter," he whispered, leaning close. Ethan felt the cold edge of fear, realizing that Victor's charm could flip to deadly in a heartbeat. As tension mounted, Maya's decision to come forward became the catalyst for what was to come. Detective Ryland arranged a controlled meeting where Maya would identify Victor and recount what she saw. The weight of the stormy night and Simon's death hung over the room like a shadow as she spoke, describing the figure at the cliff, the movements near the car, the eerie calm despite the chaos. Ryland pieced it together. Victor's financial desperation, his obsession with Simon's inheritance, Ethan's involvement, and Maya's eyewitness account created a clear narrative. Every detail, once fragmented, now connected like dots on a map. Meanwhile, Laura continued her quiet investigation, gathering Victor's financial records, recording suspicious conversations, and piecing together the timeline of the murder. She had discovered a particularly damning email Victor sent to Ethan the night of the crash, instructing him to make it real. She realized the only way to ensure justice was to hand everything over to Ryland. Victor, sensing the pressure, began to act recklessly. He sent threatening texts to Ethan, trying to assert dominance, unaware that the same messages could be used as evidence. His paranoia grew, cracks forming in the polished veneer of the wealthy businessman. Ethan, now torn between loyalty and self-preservation, secretly started feeding information to Ryland. He described Victor's plan in detail, the car, the cliff road, the precise timing. Detective Ryland cross-referenced it with Maya's account and the financial records Laura provided. Piece by piece, the story of Simon's murder emerged, clearly, undeniable. The storm of investigation collided with Victor's fragile confidence. Alone in his study, he poured himself a glass of scotch, attempting to calm his nerves. But shadows moved differently now. He felt watched. Every creak in the old mansion made his pulse quicken. The perfect crime he had imagined so confidently now seemed brittle, vulnerable. He reviewed the events in his mind, replaying every detail of the murder, every interaction with Ethan, every conversation with Laura. And for the first time, doubt crept in. Had he left traces he didn't notice? Could a witness actually exist? The thought made him shiver. Victor Hayes sat in the dim light of his study, glass of scotch in hand, trying to calm the storm raging inside him. The mansion was silent, almost oppressive. Every creak of the floorboards, every distant drip of water from the leaky roof seemed amplified in the heavy air. He had thought he was untouchable, meticulous, calculating, precise. But lately, the cracks were appearing. He had noticed subtle changes, Laura's questioning looks, Ethan's nervous glances, the feeling that someone was following him. Tonight, the tension had reached a breaking point. Something was coming. He could feel it. Detective Mark Ryland was ready. Over the past days, he had meticulously gathered evidence: Maya's eyewitness account, Laura's damning financial records and secret recordings, Ethan's confession of his role, and the inconsistencies in Victor's carefully staged accident. Every thread wove together a damning picture, and now it was time to confront the man who had thought himself untouchable. Ryling called Laura and Ethan to a discreet location, a small warehouse on the edge of the city. Maya would also be present. The plan was simple: create a controlled environment, force Victor into revealing himself, and catch him in the act of deception. Victor, confident in his cunning, arrived at the meeting unaware of the trap. His tailored suit was perfect, his posture calm, his charm carefully rehearsed. "Detective Ryland," he greeted, voice smooth, "I trust this is about the crash?" Ryland's expression was cold, precise. "Yes, Mr. Hayes, we need to talk about that night and everything that led up to it." Victor's eyes narrowed, a flicker of unease crossing his face. "I've been through the crash. I've spoken to the police, the paramedics, everyone. I don't see what more you want." Ryland didn't answer immediately. Instead, he gestured to Laura, who stepped forward holding a thick folder. "These are the financial records, the emails, and the messages between you and Ethan," she said, voice steady. "They show planning, premeditation, and intent. And there's more." Victor's lips pressed into a thin line, a hint of panic flashing in his eyes. "I don't know what you're implying." "Implication isn't necessary," Ryland interrupted. "We have a witness who saw you near Simon's car that night, tampering with it. Someone who watched from a distance, unnoticed. Maya, would you?" Maya stepped forward, recounting the night of the storm, the shadows, the movements near the car, Victor's presence, and the chilling calm in his demeanor. Her description was precise, undeniable, and it pierced the calm veneer Victor had cultivated for so long. Ethan, standing slightly apart, felt his resolve solidify. He couldn't live with this secret any longer. He stepped forward. "It's true, I was involved. Victor planned everything, every detail. He made sure Simon couldn't survive. I helped because he promised me money, but I can't lie anymore." Victor's face went pale, his confidence crumbling. He had prepared for everything: accident reports, alibis, even his own performance as a grieving cousin, but not this: witnesses, betrayal, and irrefutable proof. Victor's hands trembled slightly as he tried to regain control. "You're all lying," he hissed. "This is a setup. You have no proof." Ryland's gaze was unwavering. "We have proof, Mr. Hayes. Emails, bank transfers, witness accounts, confessions. Everything you hope to hide is now in evidence. Your plan is over." Victor's jaw clenched. He had been so careful, so confident, but now the net had closed. Every move, every misstep, every moment of arrogance had been catalogued and turned against him. He tried one last ploy, a charm-laced attempt to manipulate the situation. "Detective, surely you see, I loved my cousin. I would never—" Ryland interrupted coldly. "Your actions speak louder than words. Simon Hayes is dead because of you. Nothing you say now can undo that." Victor's composure finally shattered. He lunged toward Ethan, anger and desperation exploding, but Ryland, anticipating the move, stepped forward and held him back. "Victor Hayes, you are under arrest for the murder of Simon Hayes." The weight of the accusation, the reality of the evidence, and the eyes of those he had underestimated pressed down on Victor like a physical force. For the first time, he felt powerless, trapped in a cage of his own making. As officers moved in to take him away, Laura felt a mix of relief and lingering fear. She had exposed the truth, but she knew Victor's cunning didn't disappear overnight. The man who had planned a murder so meticulously would haunt her thoughts for years to come. Maya, shaken but resolute, left the warehouse with a sense of justice finally served. Her courage had turned the tide, proving that a single witness, when brave enough to speak, could change everything. Ethan, under protective custody, realized the reality of his choices. He had been a pawn in a much larger game, and while justice had been served, the weight of his actions would never fully leave him. Detective Rylan watched Victor being led away, the storm finally breaking outside, rain washing over the city like a cleansing force. He knew the case wasn't just about one murder. It was about exposing greed, corruption, and the lengths to which humans would go to claim what wasn't theirs. And yet, even as Victor Hayes disappeared into custody, a part of Rylan couldn't shake a lingering unease. There were files, hidden accounts, emails, and offshore transfers that hinted at more crimes Victor had committed quietly. The man had been meticulous in life, and perhaps his downfall here was only one chapter in a much larger story. Back at the estate, Laura quietly packed a bag, planning to take time off. She had survived, played her part, and brought justice for Simon, but the world felt heavier now. She glanced out the window, seeing the estate bathed in the soft light of dawn, and thought of Victor Hayes, charming, ruthless, and utterly broken. Maya returned to her apartment, shaken but proud. Her role as a witness had changed lives, proving that courage often comes from ordinary people in extraordinary situations. Ethan, under protective custody, realized the reality of his choices. He had been a pawn in a much larger game, and while justice had been served, the weight of his actions would never fully leave him. Detective Rylan watched Victor being led away, the storm finally breaking outside, rain washing over the city like a cleansing force. He knew the case wasn't just about one murder. It was about exposing greed, corruption, and the lengths to which humans would go to claim what wasn't theirs. And yet, even as Victor Hayes disappeared into custody, a part of Rylan couldn't shake a lingering unease. There were files, hidden accounts, emails, and offshore transfers that hinted at more crimes Victor had committed quietly. The man had been meticulous in life, and perhaps his downfall here was only one chapter in a much larger story. Back at the estate, Laura quietly packed a bag, planning to take time off. She had survived, played her part, and brought justice for Simon, but the world felt heavier now. She glanced out the window, seeing the estate bathed in the soft light of dawn, and thought of Victor Hayes, charming, ruthless, and utterly broken. Maya returned to her apartment, shaken but proud. Her role as a witness had changed lives, proving that courage often comes from ordinary people in extraordinary situations. Ethan, under protective custody, realized the reality of his choices. He had been a pawn in a much larger game, and while justice had been served, the weight of his actions would never fully leave him. Detective Rylan watched Victor being led away, the storm finally breaking outside, rain washing over the city like a cleansing force. He knew the case wasn't just about one murder. It was about exposing greed, corruption, and the lengths to which humans would go to claim what wasn't theirs. And yet, even as Victor Hayes disappeared into custody, a part of Rylan couldn't shake a lingering unease. There were files, hidden accounts, emails, and offshore transfers that hinted at more crimes Victor had committed quietly. The man had been meticulous in life, and perhaps his downfall here was only one chapter in a much larger story. Back at the estate, Laura quietly packed a bag, planning to take time off. She had survived, played her part, and brought justice for Simon, but the world felt heavier now. She glanced out the window, seeing the estate bathed in the soft light of dawn, and thought of Victor Hayes, charming, ruthless, and utterly broken. Maya returned to her apartment, shaken but proud. Her role as a witness had changed lives, proving that courage often comes from ordinary people in extraordinary situations. Ethan, under protective custody, realized the reality of his choices. He had been a pawn in a much larger game, and while justice had been served, the weight of his actions would never fully leave him. Detective Rylan watched Victor being led away, the storm finally breaking outside, rain washing over the city like a cleansing force. He knew the case wasn't just about one murder. It was about exposing greed, corruption, and the lengths to which humans would go to claim what wasn't theirs. And yet, even as Victor Hayes disappeared into custody, a part of Rylan couldn't shake a lingering unease. There were files, hidden accounts, emails, and offshore transfers that hinted at more crimes Victor had committed quietly. The man had been meticulous in life, and perhaps his downfall here was only one chapter in a much larger story.